Ever stood under a sky so wide your secrets felt small? Here on the Cowboy Elect story, we ride the stories of the West campfire truths, trail dust memories, saloon whispers. Gritty humans, sometimes messy. Every tale is a horizon to chase. Subscribe, pull up a stool, and maybe find a little courage for your own frontier. The wind came off the flats like a kiln lifting grit and the smell of sage. A cottonwood leaned over a washed-out arroyo, its lowest limb creaking. From that limb, a frayed rope swung in a lazy arc. Someone had nailed a board above it with crooked black letters, "Half-breeds keep out." Cole Hart reined in at the rim. His gelding blew through its nose ears, pinned at the sound that wasn't wind, a sound thin as thread, a whimper. Cole slid out of the saddle. Heat wrapped him in a damp cloth. His canteen thumped his hip. He moved down the bank boots, slipping in powder dust. The shade under the cottonwood held a different air metallic on the tongue. She hung by her wrists, rope-biting bone. Bare toes dragged grooves in the dirt, one eye swollen shut, the other half open unfixed. Dark hair and clotted ropes. Blood had dried in a fan on her forearms. Flies worked the corners of her mouth. Cole's knife came free with a soft rasp. He looked at the nailed board. He looked at the knots. His hand steadied. The blade kissed fiber. The rope parted. The girl dropped like a sack, and he caught her against his chest. She weighed like smoke. "Easy," he said, voice low. She rasped a word in Diné he did not know. Her skin burned. Fever. He tipped the canteen and touched water to her lips. Her throat moved bird-quick. The flies lifted and came back. Cole pulled his bandana over her mouth and nose, then bundled her into his arms and climbed the bank toward the waiting horse. The gelding didn't like it. Cole spoke to him the way a man speaks to himself when no one is listening. He tied the girl cross-saddle, tied her wrists loose so blood could flow, tied knots he trusted. Then he swung up behind and turned the horse toward home. The land to prospect was a broken plate. Red ribs of rock, dry wash after dry wash. On the far ridge, a pair of turkey vultures rocked on the thermals. A wren hopped in the shade of a prickly pear and flashed away when the horse clattered past. Cole kept the pace steady. He watched the horizon, but more than that, he watched the girl's breath shallow under the dust. His place sat a mile off the road where the sage grew thick against the first fingers of the cedar spine. A single-room cabin, a lean-to, shed a corral and a wind-split fence. He swung down, lifted the girl again, felt her go slack, and then tense. The fever had teeth. Inside smelled of coffee grounds and gun oil and sun-warmed wood. He laid her on his narrow bed and pulled a clean sheet under her, then brought the kettle to boil. The knife went back in its sheath. He washed the rope burns with water and crushed leaves of wild mint from a jar he kept for nights that would not end. The mint bit his fingers. She hissed and jerked. He worked slow. He cut the ties at her wrists and wrapped them with strips torn from an old undershirt. He used a small whalebone needle to pick splinters. He looked only where his hands were. "Water," she whispered at last, her voice a moth wing. "You got it." He lifted her head and let a little more past her cracked lips. Her good eye tracked him doubtful sharp. He set the tin cup within reach and stepped back to give the air some room. When he opened the door to sluice the heat, the yard's dust fanned in. A wren landed on the lip of the water trough and pecked twice. It cocked its head, eyed him, then sprang into sun. Cole watched it go and tightened the leather strap on the door latch out of habit. The strap was cut from old rope he had trusted on the trail. When rope frays, you cut before it kills. You do not tie another knot on top of a bad one. He had learned that with men. He had learned that with himself. She slept and shook with fever. He set an oil lamp far back left. The window crack stirred a broth with jerky and desert sage. By evening the light went copper, and the swallows came slick and sudden across the sky. Cole ate standing. She watched him from under her lashes like a wild thing in a snare. "You're safe here," he said. His voice did not try to be soft, it tried to be true. She took a long time to answer. "Why?" The word was thin but level. "Because I like my sleep," he said. "I would not sleep after leaving you under that tree." Her swollen eye closed. The other stayed on him, then moved to the corner where his rifle leaned. She looked at the door and the window and the floor, as if she were counting exits. He did not move to block any. He set his spoon down, washed it, hung it on a nail. "Eat," he said, and left the bowl on a stool by the bed. She did not touch the food until he picked up his own bowl and lifted the spoon. She watched his mouth. She watched his hands. She took a first quick bite, then another, then steadier. When she coughed, he handed a rag. When the bowl was empty, she kept the spoon. He took it back only when her fingers loosened. "You got a name." Silence. A small shake of the head was all. "Then I will call you girl until you tell me different." He rinsed the bowl, hung it. He pulled a rolled mattress out and laid it on the floor by the door. He unbuckled his gun belt, but set the Colt within easy reach. He sat on the edge of the mattress and watched the light walk up the wall and disappear. Hoofbeats sounded on the road about an hour after full dark, slow and sure. Not a ranch hand, not a drunk, the kind of horse that listens to the reins. The sound paused at the fence line, then came on in a crunch of gravel. The gelding in the corral snorted and turned in a tight circle. Cole did not stand. He did not reach for the lamp. He breathed through his nose and let the night adjust his eyes. The girl shifted on the bed and her breath skipped. A knuckle tapped the door. 3 times impatient. Someone who knew men were inside. Cole said nothing. The tapping came again, then a voice that had sand in it and a smile you could hear. "Evening, Hart." The voice belonged to Silas Boone. Cole had heard it in saloons at the edge of trouble and out on the flats where trouble looked like a man on his knees. "Evening," Cole said to the dark. Boone laughed soft. "Got a warrant to look for stolen property, came from Stillwater. Mr. Kane is missing a thing or two. You mind opening up?" "Hold it to the light," Cole said. A pause, longer now. The paper rustled outside and a match rasped. Orange bloomed under the crack. The flame licked the warrant, then died. The smell of sulfur came through the wood. "Paper looks good from here," Boone said. The smile had moved. "Trouble is, I left it at the office. We can do this neighborly." Cole stood then. He lifted the bar on the door and set it down again. He met the girl's eye and held a finger to his lips. She drew the blanket to her chin and went still. "I like neighborly," Cole said. "I like it in daylight." Boone's boots scuffed the step. Something metallic tapped wood. The latch trembled. A shadow moved across the chink between plank and jamb. Boone leaned so the outline of his hat brim cut a clean line across the crack. The outline did not move away. The girl's breath hitched and held. A wren chirped once from the trough and fell quiet. The rope strap on the latch creaked under Boone's slight pressure. It made a small, hungry sound. Boone's shadow cut the crack clean. The latch strap creaked again. Cole could smell his match sulfur and horse sweat under dust. "Sun's down," Boone said. "Men lie easy when truth is on their side. Open up." "Truth keeps daylight hours," Cole said. A short silence. Leather shifted. The girl's breath rasped once and stopped. Cole could hear her count inside her chest. "Your gelding's a fine one," Boone said. "Shame if something spooked him in the night." Cole lifted the bar at last, just enough for the wood to groan. He did not open the door. "Come back with paper in the morning." Boots took one step off the stoop, another. The shadow shifted away from the crack. Morning, then, Boone said, the smile back in his voice, neighborly. Hoofbeats turned slow and moved off along the fence. They faded and left the frogs at the seat behind the corral to make their small machine music. Cole set the bar back in place and stood until his heart slowed. He went to the rug by the stove, hooked it aside, and lifted the trap door. Earth smell came up from the dark. He tested the ladder with his heel. "If they come," he said, "go down. Wait for my voice." The girl nodded. She had pulled herself upright, a blanket around her shoulders like a shawl. Her hair had dried into a wild pelt. Her good eye stayed on him. "Can you stand proper?" He reached an arm and waited. She took it. Her palm was rough as rope. She stood swayed, then set her feet. "Name," Cole said. She swallowed. "Maya." The sound came like a stone dropping into shallow water. "All right, Maya," he said. He pointed to a nail where one of his shirts hung clean and sun-stiff. "Wear that. Boots are by the chest, small pair. Food is there. Hinge squeaks on the trap, so mind it." She looked at the shirt, then at him as if waiting for the price. He turned to the door and blew out the lamp. The night held. They slept uneven. At first light, Cole went out with the bucket. The air before sun carried a cold bite. He splashed the yard down where blood might have fallen from the girl's wrists and brushed the dirt smooth with a broom. The bucket water made a thin mud that darkened the dust and drank the trace. The gelding pushed his nose into Cole's shoulder. Cole rubbed the soft place between eyes and spoke to him about nothing in particular. Back inside, he found the bowl empty and the shirt too big on Maya, but cinched with a length of twine. She had rolled the sleeves many turns. The boots fit well enough. The swollen eye had bled into yellow. "Can you keep quiet if men return?" he asked. She nodded. "Good." He boiled coffee. The bitter steam filled the cabin. He poured a little for her and a lot for himself. When he set the tin cup at her place on the bed rail, she sniffed it the way a coyote tests something that might be bait. She drank. Late morning, a trail of dust lifted on the east track and brought it to his gate. Boone again. 2 riders behind both, with hats down and the lazy posture of men who like to shove. Boone smiled without teeth. "Here's your daylight," he said. "Let us take a peek." Cole stepped into the doorway and filled it. The Colt sat low and dark at his hip. The rifle leaned inside against the jamb where his hand could find it. "You serve me your paper and I'll serve you your peak," Cole said. Boone spread his hands. "Some folks never trusted paper. We can do it by handshake." The rider on Boone's left put a boot on the bottom rail of the fence and grinned like he would enjoy breaking things. "We can do it through a window," he said. Cole did not look at him. He kept his eyes on Boone as if the man were the only living thing in the yard. "My door stays shut." Boone rubbed his jaw as if thinking hard. His eyes slipped once to the window. Cole saw the flick and moved so that his shoulder ate the window's sight line. He felt the girl behind him go still. The room breathed like a deer in brush. A sound came down from the ridge then. One long note that rose and fell, not a shout, not a coyote. Boone's head turned a fraction. Cole heard the iron turning in the men's minds. 4 riders stood on the break of the land above the corral. They were black against sky, still as fence posts. One lifted a hand. The sun caught the ring on his finger. The gesture was not threat and not greeting. It was kin to both. Boone's smile thinned. "Your company keeps early hours," he said. Cole did not answer. He could feel something change in the light. He let the silence pull. The man on the ridge urged his horse down the slope in a slow, careful line. He stopped 10 paces out of rifle reach and called in a tongue that wore the land better than English. The sound sifted like grit in wind. Maya stepped past Cole and stood where Boone could see her. The rider spoke again. She answered, voice low, steady, now the fever burned out of it by purpose. Boone clicked his tongue in a false, friendly way. "We can come back," he said, "with all the daylight the county can spare." "You do that," Cole said. Boone turned his horse. He did not hurry. His men did not either. They left tracks deep enough to hold water if there had been any. The riders from the ridge waited until Boone was a small thought in the distance. Then the man with the ring came closer and took off his hat. He was older than the others, hair streaked with iron. His eyes hooked everything in at once and made decisions without moving. He looked at Cole, then at Maya's wrists, then at the rope marks on the doorstrap. His gaze softened on none of them. "Maya," he said in English, "you are not alone." "Uncle," she said. She did not reach for him. She did not smile. Her voice carried the ground between them with a single word. Ben Yazzie swung down, glanced once at Cole, and offered his wrist in the way of men who have no interest in hugging. Cole took it. The grip was dry and sure. "Boone will return," Ben said. "We should not be here." Cole nodded. He felt the truth of it in the floorboards. "Give me 1 hour." He went inside and cleared the wash basin. He burned straw in the stove to burn smell and smoke out the old blood. He found a picture frame in a drawer and lifted the photo of a brown-haired woman with a shy smile that tried to be brave. He wrapped it in a kerchief and set it in the bottom of his saddlebag. He took down the rope strap from the door and cut away the worst of the fray and coiled the good length. He rolled his blanket. He slung the rifle. Maya watched and said nothing. When he looked up, she stood by the trap door with the rag he had given her the night before folded neat. She put it in his hand. They left by the back gate where the sage grew thick. Ben led them on a narrow line of ground that refused wheels and welcomed hooves. The air turned clean as they climbed. A grasshopper banged against Cole's boot and fell away. The sun pressed a hand on the back of his neck. He took one swallow from his canteen and swished the water before swallowing. He saved the rest because a man saves what matters. On a high ridge, Ben stopped and pointed with his chin. Prospect lay in a shallow bowl, roofs like dulled tin, one main street that cut its own line of bright dust. The cedar spine rose behind it like teeth. "I need powder and cartridges," Cole said. He looked to Maya, and salt and flour. Ben weighed this and nodded once. "We cover the ridge. Go and return before the long shadow." Prospect Street smelled of lathered horses and hot iron and fried fat. Children stood barefoot outside the mercantile and sucked on fence rails because there was not much else to do. Cole tied his gelding to the hitching post and took Maya in through the shade of the awning. She kept her chin low and her eye moving. Inside the general store, the air had the spice of coffee and the sharp bite of lamp oil. Mr. Stokes, who knew how to sell a thing for 18 cents and write 30 on the slate, nodded once. Cole bought flour and a small sack salt in a twist of paper, 2 boxes of 44, and a packet of fuse. He set a length of fuse back and picked up a small paper of white powder from a tray by the counter. "What's that?" Stokes said, bored. "For picture taking," Cole said. "Magnesium." Stokes grunted. "You planning to sit for a portrait?" Cole did not answer. He paid and bagged what would fit in his saddlebags. When they stepped back into the heat, a man in a fine coat the color of old money was standing 3 feet to the left of the door. He wore gloves when nobody else wore gloves. His beard looked kept by another man's hand. "Mr. Hart," he said, as if they had time for manners. "Gideon Kane." I believe you have a small spread to the north. Cole looked at the gloves. I have ground, he said. Ground is only ground without water, Kane said soft. Still water has water. I will make you a generous offer for your place at the edge of mine. Men like us can help one another. Cole thought of the board nailed above a cottonwood limb and of the rope that cut skin to bone. He did not smile. Men like us, he said, tasting the words, do not include you. Kane's eyes cooled by 1 degree. He looked past Cole at Maya as if she were something on a shelf. Sheriff Amos Ellery came out of his office 2 doors down and stood as if he were built there. Morning, Gideon Amos said. He was not smiling either. His thumb rubbed a ring along its chain at his vest. The ring caught sun the way the rider's ring had on the ridge. Kane tipped his hat polite as a sermon. Sheriff, Mr. Hart and I were discussing development. Amos watched their faces and not their words. Development takes patience, he said. Kane's mouth offered a smile that did not travel to his eyes. I have patience, he said. He moved closer to Cole by the smallest margin. If you see a girl that does not belong, you bring her to me. I pay. Maya looked at the street and the far hills and the sky rather than at him. Cole stood so that Kane's view of her ended at Cole's shoulder. You pay, Cole said, for what you cannot own. Kane stepped back. Prospect changes whether we like it or not, he said. Water will flow where I say. He turned and walked, the gloves flashing once before the heat swallowed the light. Amos watched him go, then looked at Cole. He did not ask questions. Watch your back, he said. We will, Cole said. They left town by a side track and let the horses pick their way through a wash full of round stones. The heat pressed hard now. Cottonwoods rustled in the shallow stream bed, even with no water to work with. On a low rise, Peterson's old photo shack glinted with its rickety sunlit panes. Cole thought of the paper in his pocket. They reached the ridge where Ben had said to meet. Buzzards hung above the line of hills as if pinned there. The trail down into the cut had been clean that morning. Now a fresh pine lay across it, sappy and too green to have fallen on its own. Stop, Cole said. A rifle cracked from the right wall. The bullet threw dust at their stirrups. Another shot came from the left. The sound ran up and down the rock like it was lost. Off Cole shouted, and they slid from the saddles and pulled the horses into the lee of a boulder. Chips of stone nipped their hair and coats. Maya crouched low, grabbed the reins in both hands, and pressed her cheek to the gelding's neck to calm it. Her breath found a pattern, and the horse matched it. Hello, the cut, a voice called from higher ground, cheerful as Sunday. Silas Boone. I see you, Hart. Mr. Kane is short a few valuables. He would love them back. Send the girl up first. Cole sighted on a glint of metal and put a round into it. The glint vanished. The canyon filled with grit. A figure on the right flickered between juniper shadows and fired again. Cole shot back. His ankle rolled on loose stone, and a pain shot up his leg and switched off. He ignored it. Ben's whistle came thin and far. Riders broke from the brush on the ridge above the left wall. Ben stood in his stirrups, lifted his rifle, and answered Boone with a shot that made one of the men on the right sit down hard and stay down. Go, Ben shouted in English. Take the bottom. We pull them. No, Cole said. He stepped to Maya and pressed something into her palm. The whalebone of a knife handle warm from his pocket. If they get close. She nodded once. No fear in it, only decision. Boone barked orders that hit rock and came back at him. Two of his men slid down the right wall on their backsides' heels, digging in rifles up eyes bright as coyotes. Ben kicked his horse forward and let his voice carry. He fired twice and men answered blades of sound crossing the cut. Uncle Maya said the word thick in her throat. Ben did not look at her. He put his horse between her and the gunfire and leaned low for speed. One of Boone's men took aim and steadied for a breath that seemed like a whole minute. On the far wall, Silas Boone rose from behind a boulder, braced his rifle on a sun-bleached log, and set his cheek to the stock. His mouth was a line. The barrel tracked Ben's chest and settled there. Boone's cheek pressed to the stock. The barrel settled on Ben's chest. Cole fired first. The shot shattered the bleached log and spit splinters across Boone's face. Boone flinched and fired anyway. Ben's hat jumped. The bullet took nothing but felt close enough to burn hair. Horses screamed. Juniper bark popped and danced down the slope. Bottom. Ben yelled voice even as if the air were not cutting with lead. He heeled his horse and ran a zigzag that made the line of Boone's aim slippery. Two of Boone's men slid and tumbled boots, clawing for purchase. Cole grabbed Maya's arm and pulled her into the slot where the boulder bit the cut and made a thin run like a throat. The gelding came behind, pressed by fear and trust. Dust boiled. Chips stung the back of Cole's neck. He pushed Maya forward and felt the ground tip then steady. The slot bent left and right blind turns in rock, their shoulders scraped, the horse behind shoved with a snort and heat. They reached a kink where the walls opened for a breath. Cole looked back. Ben's horse reared and came down hard. Two men piled into him and dragged at his legs. Ben swung his rifle like a club and sent teeth into the dust. Then three more were on him. He went to a knee, rose, half a hand went down under weight and grit and hands. Maya's voice came raw. "Uncle." Cole hauled her deeper into the slot. The cut swallowed them in shade that smelled like damp stone. The sound of fighting thinned to single shots, then to breathing, then to nothing. They came out behind a fold of rock that let them see down the wash without being seen. Boone's men had Ben on his feet with his hands wrenched behind him. They tied him with a rope that looked like it had seen other wrists. Boone stood close and said nothing. Ben stood straight and said nothing. The sun made a hard crown on both their heads. "Move," Boone snapped, and they moved. They took him toward the ridge where the cut split into two like forked tongue. Cole watched until the dust line thinned. He felt Maya shake once whole body, then go still again, iron over water. They waited out the flies and the heat where the shade stayed. When the light went down by a hand's width, Cole pushed them up a goat trail that ran close to sky. From the high shoulder of the ridge, they looked out across a basin of stone and shadow. Far below, at a place where the red ridges made a shelf, men stood like black nails hammered into a board. Ben was one of the nails. He did not kneel. He did not bend. Boone stepped back and lifted his rifle. The report came up the ridge late and thin. Ben's shape folded and lay there. The buzzard circled wider. Maya did not make a sound. Her hand tightened around the whalebone handle until her knuckles whitened, and then let go. She breathed, and the breath came back to her from the stone. Cole touched her shoulder. It was small under the shirt and hard as a knot. "We go," he said. They turned away from the basin and climbed into a country that liked to keep its own counsel. Juniper rock, a thin smell of resin when a boot scraped bark. They moved until the sun went from their faces and the shade turned honest. Ben's men found them near dark. 3 riders, one with a blood stripe on his sleeve where lead had passed through. The man in front carried himself like an elder and a blade. His face was a riverbed full of lines. His eyes were bright coals in that riverbed. "Hastian Redclay," Maya said, respectful as prayer. He nodded once to her, then to Cole. He said a few words in Diné that sat on the air like stones. Maya answered and lifted her wrists so he could see. He reached and turned them gently, reading the burns like a map. He looked at Cole as if to weigh the measure of the man. Cole met his eyes and did not drop them. "Come," Hastian said in English. "There is a place." They followed him to a long face of limestone that at first looked whole. Hastian moved his hand along a seam and pressed where the seam widened to a hair. The stone shifted on some old hinge that had nothing to do with iron. Cold air breathed out and stroked their sweat. The horses blew and turned their ears into the opening. "On foot," Hastian said. They hobble-tied the animals in a pocket of grass and left them with a pan and a trickle of water that came from somewhere. The passage took them single file. The floor tilted down. The air held damp and mineral. Their footsteps made small answers. The dark was not full dark. Light came from a crack above where the world had forgotten to finish the roof. The tunnel widened and the world turned blue. A shaft of day fell like a rope from a hole high above straight into a pool so clear that rock looked like rock seen through air. Water ran down a black wall in a thin curtain and whispered a small song that found the bone inside a person and washed it. Maya went to the edge on bare feet and crouched. The light took the yellow from her bruised eye and left a deep brown. She cupped water and drank. She let it run over the scars on her wrists. The skin seemed to quiet. Her shoulders dropped and stayed where they belonged. "My name is Wren," she said. Cole came to the pool and knelt. He filled his canteen and drank from his hands. The water had a clean bite. It tasted like coins pressed to the tongue, then like snow melted on a stove. He splashed his face and felt the day fall away by layers. He looked up through the shaft at a pin of sky that looked close enough to touch. Hastian set a leather-wrapped bundle on a stone ledge. He unrolled it. Inside lay a flat piece of sandstone carved with lines and small marks. The marks were not letters he knew. They were a language of movement and memory. He traced a path with a brown finger. He spoke in Diné, then in English for Cole. "Blueheart, a gift given before your people knew this ground. It flows when the sun burns the world. Those who guard it must hold it clean." Cole looked at the water and at the lines on the stone and at the intensity in the old man's face. He thought of Cain's gloves and the way he had said water would flow where he said, He thought of the rope and the board and the cottonwood limb. Kane thinks he chases silver, Cole said. We give him silver to chase. Hastian watched him. His mouth did not move, but something in his eyes suggested he approved. The broken angel mine, Cole said to Wren. East side of the spine. Vein played out years back. Rock dust there glitters. We make it sing. He will come. Wren stood. She had water on her hands, and it ran down to her elbows. We can move our people while he looks the wrong way, she said. Hastian wrapped the stone and tied the leather thong around it. He placed it in a niche above the pool, as if putting a child to bed. He spoke again in Diné, a blessing. Then he turned and faced Cole. You cut a rope, Hastian said. Now you tie a knot that holds. Cole nodded. That is the work. They worked by the smell of lamp oil and the faint glow of a small fire built back in a low pocket so the light would not travel. Cole unrolled fuse and cut lengths with his knife. He checked caps and tamped powder into a burlap that would not throw rock so much as noise and dust. Wren folded rags filled 2 small pouches with the white powder Cole had bought in town and tied them with soft cord. She moved quiet and precise. Her face had changed. Its lines were the same, but the set of it was different. The fever had been replaced by will. They left the chamber near midnight by a side passage that climbed steeply and opened under a skirt of rabbit brush. The moon made a clean white path on the stone. The air smelled like frost, even though the day had been a furnace. They found the mules Hastian kept for hard ground and loaded them without much talk. At Broken Angel, the portal sagged and the timbers wore powder like old bones. Cole set the charges in the mouth where rotten wood would go with a show and not seal the place. He laid a fuse that gave them time to be well away. Wren shook a rim of glittering dust along the trail leading toward the mine, then scuffed it, then shook again in a way that would read like men carrying sacks from a vein. Hastian made boot prints where they would be found. Natani, who had come with them silent as a shade, left a scrap of cloth with a pattern that might pass for a map copy to men who knew only greed. They lit the fuse and went to a saddle of rock that let them watch without being in reach. The explosion came like a thunder roll in a small room. It shoved their chests and turned the night briefly to pale gray. Dust rose and hung and glowed in the moon, a ghost that pretended to be silver. Good, Hastian said. They broke away before Echo finished its run. Stillwater's lights sat on a dark hill like a necklace. They stopped in a dry wash below its kitchen garden. Coyotes sang somewhere and stopped mid-note. Wren pointed to a small house set apart from the main building. Its windows were glass panes painted with night. Lydia's place, she said. She planted lavender there. She would sit alone to breathe. The scent met them as a memory when Cole eased the door latch with a strip of rawhide. Lavender paper furniture wax. A small music box sat on a shelf. Wren touched it as if asking permission. She opened it a crack. The tune rose thin and full of river. Shenandoah. She closed it before the next bar, and the note hung like a last thought. Desk, Natani whispered. They found a loose board under a faded rug with daisies. Under the board sat a leather journal, a bundle of letters tied with blue ribbon, 3 folded papers with seals. Wren untied the ribbon and opened a page. The writing was small and careful. He does not like that the river exists without him one line read. He told me water follows money. I told him water follows gravity. He laughed, and later he pushed me so I could understand the direction of things. The bruise at my hip looks like a hand. Wren shut the book. Her mouth had no color now. She slid the journal into the pouch under her shirt and kept the letters in her hand. They crossed the kitchen door into dark and pantry smell. Cole reached for the cellar latch and felt steps above. Boots 2, then 3. The floorboard overhead creaked in a familiar place. He opened the cellar and they went down into air that stayed cool in summer. Bottles lined the walls. The clay floor held the last damp of spring. The door above shut with a soft thud. They breathed again. A whisper came out of the black. Spanish scared and fast. Wren answered in the same tongue, slow enough to untangle fear. A shape pulled free of a shadow. A young woman with a shawl over her hair and salt dried in white lines on her cheeks. Rosa, Wren said. Rosa Alvarez touched Wren's face like a child touches a dog that is gentle. She spoke softly and kept looking at the stairs as if they might sigh. Cole caught words that meant fall and stairs and husband and lies. Then a name. Lydia. Rosa's hand made the shape of a shove and a tumble. She put her fist to her own mouth where a scream had once been and had never been let out. Wren nodded and held her hand. We take you, she said in English. Quiet now. Rosa shook her head and bit her lip and then pointed at the far wall. She moved a wooden rack aside. Behind it was a space where the plaster did not quite match. She pressed the heel of her hand into it, and it swung in a slow arc. Cold earth breathed out. Old owner Rosa whispered, "For liquor, to the creek." They went in single file, Wren first, then Rosa, then Cole, then Natani. The tunnel was low enough that they had to bend. Their boots made soft thuds on packed dirt. Roots brushed their hair. At one place, water ran in a whisper under their feet and then went away again. The air smelled like damp bread. They reached a grate of willow branches and pushed through into reeds by a dry creek that only ran in spring. Night put a skin on everything. Frogs worked at the far end where a pool held a palm of water. Wren lifted her head to listen. Voices moved over the grass. The glow of 2 lanterns washed through the reeds and turned their edges to fire. A man laughed. Another hushed him. Horses snorted and stamped. Gideon Kane spoke clear, patient pleas to be obeyed. Fan the garden, find the girl, find the book. Bring them to me living. They lay in the reeds while lantern light slid across blades and made thin knives of fire. Kane's men moved slow and careful stepping where a man might stand to breathe. Wren flattened her palm and Rosa matched her breath. Natani's hand closed on Cole's sleeve, a small pressure that said wait. The search party veered toward the garden house. Voices fell into a hush. Hinges complained. The music box gave out a single note choked at the neck. Kane's tone sharpened, not loud, but the kind that made men hurry. They went down the creek on their bellies until the reeds gave to willow, then to open sand. The night let them run. They kept low in the wash until the slope lifted toward the foothills and the sound of the ranch dropped away behind them. Sheriff Amos Ellery was in his office when they came off the alley. The lamp was turned down and the window opened to let the heat leave. He stood when he saw their faces, took the journal, and did not sit to read. He bent at the waist as if in prayer and turned pages like a man who knows handwriting. Rosa held her shawl tight and spoke in Spanish to the floor. Wren translated in a steady voice that did not waver at the parts that would break a softer throat. Amos listened and rubbed his thumb along the chain at his vest until the ring caught the lamplight. He set the hand down and read the last page again. He walked to the telegraph and wrote a wire that was short and thick. He leaned into the window and sent it with the operator himself, every click a small hammer. He looked older when he came back to the desk. The lines at his eyes dug deeper. "You will stay," he told Rosa in a voice that used to belong to family. "You are under my hand." He opened the cell across the hall not to lock her, but to hide her under the nose of anyone who would not think to look. He set water and a blanket in a chair and closed the door without letting the click sound. He turned to Cole and Wren. His jaw worked once. "You walked into hell," he said. "You walked out with my sister's voice." Hoofbeats rattled Front Street. Men's shadows broke across the window, then left. The day had not yet climbed, but the town had a twitch under its skin. Amos lifted a rifle from the rack and checked the chamber. "Gather who we can trust," he said to Cole. "No cousins of Stillwater, no mouths that eat at Kane's table." They moved through back doors and alley dark and woke up men with debt in their eyes and old anger in their hands. 12 came, which was more than a few and less than enough. They loaded cartridges in a room that smelled of ink and sweat. Someone prayed without words. Someone laughed high and quick and cut the laugh short. By noon, word had already outrun itself. Kane rode in with 10 men and tied up in a row that looked like parade. He went to the saloon and used the little room he kept as if it were a courthouse. Anyone who passed on the boardwalk dropped their gaze. The street got quiet around his shadow. Amos did not leave his office. He put 2 men in the schoolhouse, 2 in the smithy, 2 on the roofs, and 2 with him. He drank coffee that tasted like old pennies and read the wire reply when it came. Marshal Albright was on the road with 6 deputies and a warrant bag that would make a judge breathe heavy. By tomorrow evening, the operator said, "If the bridge holds." It was good, and it was not enough. Amos brought Rosa out of the cell long enough to look her in the eye and ask if she was ready to ride. She nodded like a person who knows that readiness is not the point. Cole saddled 2 horses in the alley. Wren lifted Rosa up and tucked her shawl close. "Go at the half-switchback to the foothills," Amos said. "Take the creek scar, not the ridge trail." He looked at Cole. His eyes were red and hard. "Bring her to your people. Keep her breathing." They left through the back and cut down the wash behind the tannery. The afternoon heat reached for them with lazy hands. Cole put Rosa on his faster horse and took the other because he could hold a line better on a tired mount than she could on the stout one. Wren rode without a sound. Her hands looked small on the reins. Her face did not. They made the second ridge before the light turned old. A rider slumped into the switchback ahead of them and slid off the saddle in a slow curl. Natani caught him before his face met rock. Blood had run from his shoulder and dried in a map down his side. Secondary cut, he said, breath-hitching. Found by Boone. 20 men. Dynamite. Dawn. Rosa's horse shied at the word, and Wren steadied it with a palm pressed to the neck. Cole pulled the bandana from his pocket and jammed it into the wound. He looked to Rosa. Down the ridge to town, he said, "Find Amos. Tell him the cut. Tell him to hold." He put the reins in her hands and touched her boot to start the horse. She went knees pressed back straight because falling would not help. Cole took his own horse by the cheek strap and spoke into the skin near its eye. He swung up and was already into the grade before the words finished leaving his mouth. Wren came parallel and set her jaw. She did not need to be told. The mountains took them in. Rock lifted and folded into tight places. The slope pressed their thighs and lungs until both burned. Wind brought the dry taste of old powder where men had worked stone and left ghosts in the grit. They reached the shoulder over the secondary entrance as the sun was thinking about light. Men moved below like ants around a dropped fruit. Silas Boone stood with his back to the rock face. He had a bundle of sticks in both hands tied with a yellow snake of fuse. 2 men pushed a barrel on a dolly that squeaked. Cole found a notch that gave a view and a clear line down. He settled the rifle. His breath lined up with the pulse in his thumb. When the barrel of the dolly showed a bright circle because the lid had been knocked loose, he sent a round into its rim. The powder took the spark like it had been waiting. Light hit the barrel from inside, and then the world jumped. The shock made every rock in reach answer with a sound of its own. The front rank of Boone's men went down in a tangle of limbs and dust and noise. The rest dropped to their bellies and crawled for cover that did not exist. Cole worked the lever and sent 2 more rounds into the second bundle. He did not aim at men. He aimed at what men had brought. One charge coughed and fizzled. Boone slapped at it with his hat and stopped the burn. He looked up at the ridge where the shot had come from and smiled with his teeth hidden. "Pull him out!" he shouted. 2 to the left, 2 to the right. Take him alive if you can. Mr. Kane pays extra for breath. Wren lay flat with the barrel of her carbine just past the rock. She put a shot into the dirt at a man's boots when he tried to scurry. He went backward like a crab. Natani took a bead on a man who was bold enough to run upright. The man fell like his strings had been cut. They had clipped the first rush, but not the second. Boone adapted because he had always been quick with the wrong sort of smart. He sent men around the blind corner of the ridge, hands and knees, then bellies, then the slow, careful rise that men use when they are sure you are looking the other way. Cole counted his cartridges by feel and lied to himself once. He rose fired, fell again. The rock behind his head took a chip that found his ear and drew blood without a pain worth keeping. Wren shifted 5 feet to the right and made her carbine speak in a short, even cadence that would be hard to chase. "Bridge them!" Boone yelled. Men lifted planks from a handcart and made themselves a ladder where the wall went from impossible to only stupid. One reached the top and flung his arm over and flopped like a hooked fish. Cole shot him in the shoulder and watched Will drain out of the man's mouth. The body slid and did not stop until it met a thorn bush. They could not hold the shoulder. Cole saw it in the angle of sunlight and the way Boone's men went to ground in better places. He put a hand on Wren's boot and squeezed twice. Down the saddle, he said, "We draw them away." She nodded at once. They went low and fast along a goat line that cut toward a saddle between 2 bold rocks. The path narrowed to a strip where only 1 foot at a time had ownership. Below the strip, the world fell off into scrub and loose stone and cactus. Boone saw the shift and sent 6 in a hurry. They came after faces open to heat and dust, a little hungry now that the morning's fear had turned to a want for a prize. Cole fired behind him to clip their speed, and then saved the next round because the count in his palm said do not. Wren moved like water along stone. Natani found them a slot, and then a second that made a switchback folded on itself. They broke into a shallow pass where wind had fashion. It lay like a throat between 2 flat plates of rock. Cole sent his horse ahead and slapped it hard on the hindquarters. The animal went because a horse knows when it saves a man. He slid off his saddlebag and dug until his hand found the magnesium roll wrapped in paper and the fuse and the small cloth of pine pitch he had taken from the photo shack and kept for luck. He set the roll on a ledge just above head height and tied a loop of fuse through it. Wren understood without a word. She took an arrow from the short bow Natani had carried since the first time he needed to hunt. She wrapped its head in pitch and bound it with a strip of cloth that would hold flame long enough. Boone's men spread along the rocks outside the pass. One whistled high again to fix nerves. The sound bounced back thin. Another man laughed to break the omen and made a softer sound when a bullet snapped the air above his hat. "Talk, Hart," Boone called. "Tell me you are done. We are 2 hands apart. Tell me, and I will leave you teeth to chew with." Cole did not answer. He licked the strike of a match and felt the sulfur sting his tongue. He touched the flame to the end of fuse and then to the arrowhead until it took a true burn. He nodded to Wren and lifted his rifle to put the barrel where a head might look. Wren drew and released. The arrow sailed slow and perfect across the gap and struck the ledge over the pass with a dry slap. Fire touched the paper and then the white powder woke. It did not explode. It flared. The light blew out and up and painted the rock with a shape that looked like wings if a person wanted wings to be real. The blaze made a heat that had no smoke and a noise that was mostly silence and a little hiss. Men swore. One stumbled backward and lost his balance. He went down on his back and waved his rifle like it had slithered. Another fired up out of reflex and hit the glowing shape because fear is a poor shot. The pass filled with white brilliance and then settled back to the sharp blue of morning. Cole and Natani used that breath to move to take the angle no one saw. Wren put a bullet into the ground by a boot to keep the closest head low. Cole came around a point and took the man who was flinching. The man dropped his gun and tried to lift both hands. Cole put a knee in his chest and took his pistol and threw it behind him. Hoofbeats sounded from farther north. Not a few. Many. The rhythm was tight and clean, the kind that belongs to men who ride together more than they stand. Boone pulled his gaze from the pass to the saddle and went still. Riders broke from behind a stand of piñon and came down in a line that did not waver. Wren was at the front and looked taller than her horse because of the way she held her head. Natani rose at Cole's side and answered with a single shout. Sheriff Amos Ellery rode at the right edge, hat down, jaw set, the ring chain glinting once. 4 townsmen were behind faces pulled hard but willing to be here. Boone put his palms out and dropped them to the dirt with the slow grace of a man who still wants to find a good angle. His men looked at his hands and followed with their own. One tried for a last shot, and Amos put a round into the rock so close to the man's ear that the man's future hearing would not be the same. They tied hands with rawhide. The men stayed quiet because the earth had taken their loud. Cole picked up his horse's reins where they trailed like a dropped ribbon. He rubbed the animal's neck and spoke to the skin. Amos swung down and went to Cole and Wren. He did not speak at first. He touched the brim of his hat to both of them and then to Natani. He looked down into the cut where the secondary entrance waited. The dust there had settled on the broken device that would not go boom today. "Rosa," Cole asked with the single word. "In town," Amos said, breathing. "Talk to a wire I sent. Marshall is closer than we thought. Kane is not in Prospect." Cole let the air go from his lungs and let it fill again. Wren's shoulders dropped a notch. She looked down the valley where heat shimmered. The light made the far desert into a sheet of metal. A train whistle rose from the east, thin and high. It ran along the line of hills and broke apart over rock. Amos turned his head toward the sound and kept looking until it was gone. Dust lifted on the southern horizon, a faint smear. The sun stood above it like a coin. The wind shifted and brought the faint smell of creosote and something else. Water may be a long way off. Marshal Albright came in with 6 deputies and a stack of papers heavy enough to bend a desk. His coat was dusted white to the knees. He shook Sheriff Amos Ellery's hand and went to work without talk. They walked Boone past the boardwalk windows with his wrists tied and his mouth flat. Faces turned and did not speak. Stillwater's ledgers lay on a table at the saloon and did not like the light. Signatures repeated with the same flourish where they should have stuttered. Deeds had lines drawn through names that belonged to others. A box held letters sealed with a court stamp that did not match the court. Rosa Alvarez signed her name in the book and placed her hand over it, as if to keep it still. She spoke and a deputy wrote, and the room held that voice with care. Gideon Kane was not in his office. He had taken coin and a fast horse and gone south by the river road. The bank clerk handed over keys and watched his own fingers do it. The marshal sent riders as far as the toll bridge and one more to the rails to write to Yuma and Tucson. The air in Prospect felt different when the papers were nailed to doors. At sundown, the marshal read the warrants aloud on the steps of the courthouse. The words were simple and had weight: fraud, coercion, conspiracy. The town listened with its jaw tight. When he finished, he pointed to Stillwater's water rights and filed a notice at the recorder's window that made men behind Gideon nervous. Amos stood to the side with his hat in his hands. He let out a breath when the crowd did, and the breath sounded like a man who had been under water too long. He went back to his office, unlocked the bottom drawer, and lifted a small music box wrapped in a handkerchief. He set it on the shelf over his desk and turned the key once. Shenandoah walked out of it spare and clean. He watched dust turn in the lamplight until the tune ended. Blue Heart Spring filled a little more with each day of heat. The passage breathed cool. The chamber held food and blankets and the quiet of people who had earned quiet. Hastian red clay touched pollen to foreheads and spoke the words that keep water clean. Children reached for the pool and were pulled back with a word that made them laugh. Men and women cut poles and tied them into frames and covered them with hides and woven mats. They built under open sky, where the wind could visit. Smoke went straight up at dusk and then lay flat as the night cooled. Wren showed children where a ledge could be stepped over and where it could not. She checked the guards twice before she slept. Cole Hart worked on the ridge above the spring. He set 4 skids and skinned 8 logs and squared them with an adze that bit sure. He raised a small wall and left a space for a door that would not stick. He used old rope for a latch strap and cut away the fuzz so the fibers would hold. He tied each end with knots he trusted. Rosa brought a basket of flatbread and beans to the ridge and set it on the unfinished floor. She watched the way Wren's voice lowered when she spoke to the old and lifted when she spoke to the young. She smiled for the first time without looking at the door. Amos rode up the path at noon with 2 deputies behind and a rolled paper under his arm. He dismounted as if the saddle had grown taller. He nodded to Hastian and waited until the old man nodded back. He handed Wren the paper and stepped away. The paper said what men had already decided with their backs. The territory recognized the right of the Diné to live and drink and plant along the cedar spine within named bounds. The Blue Heart and its approaches were under protection. The words were official and carried a seal. They did not feel like a favor. Wren read and folded the paper and gave it to Hastian. He placed it with the stone map in a niche above the pool and covered both with a piece of woven cloth. No one touched that cloth after that. Amos stood near the pool with his hat in his hands. He looked down through the water and saw his face move there. He dipped his fingers and pressed water to the ring that hung on its chain. The silver flashed and went quiet. He put the ring back against his shirt and did not wipe his hand. Boone and his men left Prospect with irons on their wrists and dust on their boots. The marshal rode with them as far as the rail. He sat the horse straight. He did not watch Kane's road. Evening settled on Blue Heart like a blanket that smells of sun. Coyotes talked on the far slopes and stopped when an owl said enough. The first stars showed early in the crack above the chamber and doubled in the pool. Wren's hair was braided in a way that carried both of her names. Her dress held a pattern of birds stitched over a line of water. Cole hung Ben Yazzy's whalebone knife on a peg by the door of the new cabin. He drove the peg steady and stepped back until the knife sat right. He ran a hand down the new rope strap and felt the smooth place where he had worn the fuzz away. He lifted the canteen and listened to water move in it. Wren came up the path, the light off the pool on her wrists where the scars had thinned. She sat beside him on the unfinished step. They watched swallows turn under the last light and snap insects without effort. "You built without a door," she said. "It will swing tomorrow," he said, "for now the air can pass." She placed her hand on her chest, then on his. He covered her hand with his and let it rest. Her pulse was slow and sure. His matched it. "Wren," he said. She turned her head. Her eyes were dark and clear. He did not ask a question. She did not answer one. They stood and walked to the spring where Hastian waited with a small bowl and a mouthful of words. He spoke to them and to the water. He touched pollen to their temples and to their joined hands. He cupped water and poured it over their hands until the scars and calluses shone. The bowl was empty. The sound of the pool took its place. Rosa watched from the doorway and lifted the corner of her shawl to wipe her eyes. Amos stood at the mouth of the passage with his hat in his hands and did not move. Natani leaned on a post and smiled a little only on one side. Later Cole and Wren sat on the cabin step again. The night came up the slope and filled the spaces between the piñon. A line of dust lay thin on the southern horizon where a road cut through heat. It held its own and then thinned to nothing. A wind stirred in the cedar and brought the smell of wet stone. A wren fluttered onto the rope latch, cocked its head, then flew. High above the spine, an eagle tipped a wing and caught a current that lifted it out over the basin. The spring kept talking in the dark, the same small song as before, the same as after. Cole reached for Wren's hand. She gave it. The rope on the door creaked once like a quiet house finding its shape. The water kept on. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.